Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Navigating Challenges and Maximizing Value for Master Planning and Capital Improvements. I'm Jennifer Getz, the Editorial Director of Facility Executive Magazine, and this webinar is presented by ARC Facilities. Before we get started, I'll cover a few housekeeping items. There will be a question and answer segment at the end of this presentation today. Please find the question box in the dashboard on your screen. This is where you can submit questions for our speakers today. If at any time you experience a technical difficulty, please send us a message via that question section and someone on our team will answer you privately. Now I'm happy to be introducing your speakers for today. Sean Tracy has 20 years of experience in healthcare facilities management and is currently the facilities director at Castle Rock Adventist Hospital. Sean holds a bachelor's in healthcare administrations from Colorado State University and is currently finishing his master's degree. Sean is also a certified healthcare facilities manager through the American Society of Healthcare and serves as this year's president for the Colorado Association of Healthcare Engineers and Directors. Dr. Lewis Fletcher is the Executive Director of Facilities and Operations for El Paso County, Colorado School District 49. He leads security, transportation, nutrition services, facility maintenance, capital construction, and community planning leaders who serve over 28,000 pre-K students. Previously, he was the Chief Executive Officer for the Western region of Troy University, among other higher education leadership positions. He served as an officer in the United States Air Force for 20 years in locations such as Korea, Greece, France, and Germany. His final assignment was as the founding dean of the Advanced Space Operations School in Colorado Springs. And finally, we have David Trask, the National Director of ARC Facilities, who is a keynote speaker, host of the Facility Voices podcast, author, and thought leader in the facilities management industry. David focuses on helping hospitals, universities, K-12 districts, and other organizations leverage innovative technology to drive efficiency in the healthcare management industry through thought leadership and advocacy. He has presented at numerous facilities, associations, and conferences, including IFMA, ASHI, APA, and NFMT, as well as regional events. Most recently, David was selected to join the Education Program Committee for IFMA World Workplace and is also an advisory board member for Facilithon. David, Dr. Fletcher, and Sean, thank you all so much for joining us for this webinar today.
Thank you.
No, thank you so much, Jennifer. We appreciate it. And Dr. Fletcher and Sean, I really appreciate you joining us today. And what we're going to jump in and really talk about is we're going to kind of flow in this agenda here. And it's what are facility condition assessments, FCAs? How involved is senior leadership in that process? Also, which internal department should be involved in an FCA? How important is it to validate the accurate information prior to performing that FCA? And also, what should you expect to really glean out of and learn from that FCA result? What is the impact of inaccurate findings in an FCA? What does that mean when the information coming out of that really isn't accurate? And how does that impact your master planning and your capital improvements? Also, why is it important to maximize the useful life of assets through proactive maintenance? What's that move forward to maintain that equipment moving forward? Also, how often should you review and update that information that you've got out of that FCA? Because again, FCAs are a snapshot in time. And then what are the long-term benefits of FCAs for your master plan? So let's jump in here. So let's start with what is an FCA, and it's really a way for you to evaluate and get the current condition of your existing site. So identifying those deficiencies and helps you guide some of those decision-making processes that you have moving forward. But it also helps you really get that 30,000-foot snapshot of your site. And of course, your master plan, you can glean information out of that FCA to really develop that roadmap. 5, 10, 25, 30 years for that master plan based off of accurate information, but it also helps you align with your long-term goals. So FCAs traditionally include asset inventories, identifying what's really out in the field. Also, what's the current structural conditions of your site? Also, some of that utility mapping gives you a snapshot of what does my utility mapping look like? Is it up to current standards? Also, what is that does that impact your master plan, your long-term master plan? And then also, like I mentioned earlier, the frequency and in how often you should not only update your FCA, but how often should you do a new FCA and really get that current condition later on. But these are just some of the things that are identified traditionally in an FCA checklist. It's building systems, including HVAC and all your other parts of your building system. Structural components, your foundation, your walls, building envelope, that's the exterior, windows, doors, roofs, of course, interior elements like your finishes, lighting, all of that stuff. But then also the stuff between the buildings. So the site information, parking lots, sidewalks, all your landscape. Also the accessibility and compliance side of it, the ADA compliance side of it. Also, how does the accessibility for those folks with disabilities, documentation review. So all your maintenance records, checking on what's the useful life of those traditional pieces of equipment. And also, what are some of the previous assessments that you've done in the past? Also, your drawings, are they accurate? Are they showing current conditions? Also, equipment warranties and things like that. But then also the cost estimation. What's your replacement cost? What's your traditional end of life for those particular units? What's the expected life expectancy based off of the current conditions of each of those units? So let's jump in here too, and let's talk from our panelist perspective is how involved is your senior leadership in the FCA process selection? And let's start with Dr. Fletcher.
Yeah, I think one of the things that you have to hold really dear in that is that the leadership has to be involved because at some point you're going to need money. So, at some point you're going to need money. So you have to make sure that whether it be your financial leadership or your executive leadership, they have to be all involved with it. Myself, in my position, I have a long title. I function as the chief operating officer. So I have to make sure that I work with our superintendent and our structure within our school district. The superintendent is the leader of the district. If I am not letting the superintendent know what's going on as we go through and do our facility condition assessment, and then I may come back with a crisis, or I may come back with some information and it won't be understood. Also, within a school district, we have governance from a school board. So in addition to the superintendent, who's my boss, I directly report to the superintendent, I also have to have considerations for a board of people from the community who have been elected to be governance for the school district. So in that process, I'll give you an example how that looks here in a school district. After I got my facility condition assessment from this year, because we had to refresh it, one of the things when we have our annual planning summit with the school board, I took all the things that were findings to the school board, and I had about a half an hour within this meeting to talk to them about the things FCA found and start to foreshadow what we're going to be doing in a facility master plan. The key things that were outlaid there were looking at the facility condition indexes to say how our buildings are doing. Also looking at how that relates to deferred maintenance, how far we're behind. I don't know anybody in any school district who's not behind, but we're behind by about $145 million. So
Wow.
giving them the firsthand look to understand why I'm coming to them later asking for increased amount of capital planning funds to be able to do more capital work, to be able to have a hedge against getting even deeper into the whole deferred maintenance. Also telling some of our successes, like you said, it's a snapshot. We were able to outline some of the things that we found where we actually saved money off the FCA. But if you just stop there, and I do know there's some people who look at the FCA as their master plan, you're going to be working off of a stale snapshot for quite a bit of time when you should be able to be moving forward with your activities.
I think a lot of organizations, and I'll add to what you just said because I hear this all the time. It is a snapshot in time. It's what happened that week, that day. But I think where a lot of organizations struggle is time. It's who's going to update it, who's going to maintain that, and then how is that information shared out, with folks. And it can literally be kind of all over the board, and that's kind of a challenge. And I kind of also have heard, well, I've heard this from multiple people. It can be in many cases kind of garbage in, garbage out. I've heard it all over the board as far as what's actually captured too. So I'd love to hear some of those insights from you later on as well. But Sean, what's your take, and how much is your leadership involved?
During our process, they were heavily involved, and obviously, like Dr. Fletcher said, at some point you're going to have to ask for some money. So if they've been through this process, it's important to identify those things that they're going to be hearing in the future. One takeaway that I thought I would share is just that this is a good opportunity to kind of share with your senior leadership team. Maybe they don't have a true knowledge of mechanical backgrounds. So this is a good opportunity to walk through, like, what's a boiler, what's a chiller, what's a generator. And in a point of a failure where you have something go wrong, they're a little bit more educated on, hey, this is what the service disruption is going to look like to our business, kind of from that standpoint. So I think that was kind of a unique thing I didn't think we would take out of it, that it's a good opportunity to kind of share some learnings on all the mechanical systems across your facility.
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the head there too, Sean, is many organizations, especially up in senior leadership, they're not facilities folks.
Yeah.
They don't understand, if this unit goes down, what is the impact when that unit goes down? And especially in your environment where you've got healthcare, an HVAC unit goes down, that could impact an OR,
Sure.
or that could impact, a cath lab or anything like that where it's really critical. And it also impacts in the education side of it. It certainly impacts student safety. It impacts students being able to occupy a room. I live in Florida, for goodness sakes. You don't have school if air is not working in the building.
Right.
It's
And then
95 degrees outside and 100% humidity in the summertime, or in going into the new school year, and you can't function. So I think I love what both of you said. It's that combination of sharing information, but it's also educating them.
Yeah, and David, one of the things I want to put a kind of a bumper sticker on that is that you have to not assume they understand what you understand about facilities. You really do have to talk those scenarios. So I did an article recently for the teachers in the district, not talking about, hey, we got to take care of our roofs and things like that, because that's mundane to them. What I have to say is that imagine that you're in your classroom and school has started, and there was a big snow or rain last night, and water is starting to permeate through the walls, and now you have to call the parents to pick up their kids. That's what deferred maintenance means to them. If I put out a number like $145 million, like, okay, that's a lot. What does it mean to me? So we do a lot of storytelling, and I'm sure that we all, just like Sean, we also do a lot of pictures and try to do things that will explain and communicate more so than just saying, hey, there's a lot of money going against us, and if we don't do this, the sky is falling. That really doesn't work.
Sure. No, I love that. And let me share a few other things here. And this is what I've heard, and these are kind of some of the areas that we've gleaned from other conversations. Really, it is that education. It's establishing that communication structure. What is the frequency of that communication, and update them. Give them a heads up along the way, because you never want that deer in the headlights surprise. But sometimes those happen, don't get me wrong, but providing those updates and really sharing that report on progress, I think, is a big deal. It's transparent as well, but also that timeliness of that communication, it does really prevent some of those surprises. Also, what I found, and I've heard, and I love this idea, is really creating some almost workshops. Identifying, even a site walk to explain to people who don't necessarily offer it. Throw it out there and say, hey, listen, I'd love to show you, because they don't know, and especially from a K through 12. I hear this often is, the PTA and the school board, they don't know all the different buildings, and especially they don't understand, this building's 80 years old and this one's brand new. They don't understand the impacts on that stuff in a building. But also soliciting feedback, sharing some information with that group and understanding, who's in that room. I always love to understand who's in that room and talk to them on their level, and really understanding that. Other things that I'd love to hear your feedback here is which internal departments should be involved in that FCA process? Who do you pull in to really not only identify those things up front before you do your FCA, but also through that process and, doing the FCA, whether you do it in-house or you're outsourcing, what departments are you pulling in? And then also, what are some of those departments that are also involved in that review process? And Sean, let's start with you on this one.
Yeah, I would say the top of my list was our facilities team, just being that they are day in, day out, they touch the equipment, they know the problem childs, and they have a good pulse on kind of what your facilities looks like. We involved our grounds department as they had a kind of a perspective of the exterior of the building, maybe issues with the parking lot, things like that. Our environmental services group was also included. They do the floor cleaning, things like that. They know we have terrazzo in our building, so maybe there's some issues with cracks that wouldn't get from somebody else. Obviously, our finance and administration, we kind of touched on. Our safety group we involved, just being that they may know some issues that haven't been vocally said to anybody else. And then our regulatory team, just from a healthcare standpoint, maybe previous surveys we've been dinged for this that really needs to get on the list of things to do. So I think if you incorporate all those different groups, you get a better group of opinions rather than just doing this in a silo. You're probably going to come up with some misses when it comes time to really put that list of what things you need on that FCA together.
I love that. And Dr. Fletcher, share some of your insights on this.
Absolutely. I'd say everyone, and then I'll be more, I'll go ahead and I'll describe it. We have to, first of all, make sure that the people who are using the spaces, and that's in a school district, that's our educators, our administrators, and our students. So one of the things we have to do is we have an idea about how rooms are being utilized, and by number, saying, well, this room should have 30 kids in it. But sometimes we go out and find out that they're using this for 10 kids for kind of a special pullout or something like that. So it changes even the capacity of our building. So we have to see if those conditions have to exist, or if we have to be able to relocate that to a smaller room or something like that. So that when we're doing our projection, because in the school district, it's all about how many kids can go in how many buildings. And we want to make sure we have ideal class sizes. So we don't want to go too much above 30 if we have to even get to 30 and that kind of thing. So we're doing a whole bunch of things that are integrated processes that integrate with how we actually deliver education. Of course, my facilities team is key and central to it. We hire an outside architect to come in to do the facility condition assessment, so we have some objectivity on it. Because if you look at your own stuff, sometimes, well, that's good, we know what that is, we know the history of that, that's okay. You don't want to talk yourself out of making smart change. So we do have a outside third-party consultant come in and help us with this. With looking at the environmental design as it's conducive to security, I got to have my director of security look at this with me so that we can go through and look at what are the vulnerabilities. Now, that's an interesting thing. Sometimes this will bring out vulnerabilities in your facility. So we have to have that kind of separated as confidential. We don't want to show our vulnerabilities that we find out on these things to everybody, because we don't even go into school safety these days, but we have to separate those things. So when we get our first condition assessment, we have everything in there, and then we want to be transparent with our community. So we pull out the safety and security items, and we actually pull out the diagrams of our buildings, and then we give it to our community, because they're part of who should be involved in giving feedback on the things that we put out there from the snapshot. So yeah, it's really, really a holistic kind of process. This should involve everybody who's a stakeholder to make sure at the end of the day, we're applying metrics to be able to spend money in the right places to make sure everyone is accommodated.
Certainly. I love what you said there. And these are just some of the different departments that I've heard that are typically pulled in. And obviously leadership is pulled in, maintenance, engineering, finance. They've all got their different needs or their different takes, but I look at each one of these specifically as another set of eyes, and another perspective as well. And I loved one that's not on here that I 100% agree with you is an outside set of eyes, a contractor or a third party to pulling them in. I love that because, again, they're not in the space all the time. but every one of these different departments does have a different need or a different specific use case for some of those potential results. And like you said, even from the safety and security side, especially in health, or I'm sorry, especially in education, with all that's going on in the world and all that's happened, we've all seen the news. My goodness, it's what are those vulnerabilities?
Right.
And I think everybody's really looking for ways to improve those things. So certainly, I think they should have a seat at the table. But I mean, even down to custodial. All of these changes in the building, all of these things. There's nobody. I always say this in healthcare, or in education, or even manufacturing, or any industry. Custodials in every space all the time. They know where everything is, and I can't tell you how many times I do a site walk with someone, and it's like the lead electrician or the lead plumber, and they'll go to the lead custodian and say, "Hey, I can't remember where that panel is." They just know. They're in the building all the time, so they know. So again, I love that perspective of getting more people involved. The more the better. But how important is it to validate the accuracy of that information prior to performing that FCA? So coming from the perspective of, we're going to do an FCA. What is that information? What are those things that you're gathering in advance of doing the FCA to share out with either that third party vendor or to share out with the internal team before they even start that FCA process? And let's start with Dr. Fletcher.
Yeah, I think it goes back to some of the stuff we talked about with safety and security. When you get into the crime prevention through environmental design, the SEPTET piece, you want to make sure you verify that all the things that you are saying are actually accurate and reflect what you have going on in your facilities. So what I have to do before we start the FCA, I want to make sure that I talk with my chief of security and say, hey, have we implemented these different security things that we've talked about? For example, maybe it's window film or changing the alarm systems and that kind of thing, so that when I hand it over to the third party to take a look at it, they're looking at apples to apples and not going, oh, when we were out there, we saw these things you didn't talk about. Or they might be making recommendations like it, because if you've ever seen security window film up there, sometimes you can't tell it's there. So they might come back and say, hey, we recommend that you guys get window film in all your buildings. And we're saying, well, we already did that. So we want to make sure that the feedback we get is accurate based on what's out there. So we want to be able to share that. Also, in terms of looking at what equipment is out there, we want to make sure if we're looking at something like a rooftop unit, or if we're looking at a chiller or looking at something like that, we want to make sure that we accurately depict where things are, so that they get to look at everything that we actually have, as opposed to coming back and give us a partial picture or recommending equipment that we already have that we just didn't show them.
Sure. And Sean, what's your take on this? How accurate or how important is it for you to validate that and have accurate information prior to doing that FCA?
Yeah, I was kind of surprised by it because, like, really, we have our work order system that has a good equipment list from top to bottom. And going through that, I don't know how many times we walked to some space and we kind of looked around, and it's like, well, this says there's 3 pumps, but there's actually 2. So, or maybe there's 4. So at some point we had a construction project back in the day, or something changed, and now that list is completely different. So you want to make sure that's correct, because you're really going off of this from a capital perspective. So you want to make sure that information is accurate and that all of your equipment is listed correctly, I guess, from a facility standpoint.
Yeah, it's I've heard varying things, varying stories with even what's written into the scope of an FCA. And again, it's not to disparage anybody or any organization that performs an FCA, whether it's internal or external. It's just, I think what I've heard most is the recurring theme of make sure you ask for what you really need, and you're going to identify the stuff that is really needed. And you brought up a point, and I agree. I think a lot of your buildings are not static; they change, and the equipment changes, and what it really comes down to is it's not garbage in, garbage out per se. It's just things got missed. I see this all the time when we go out and we validate a lot of equipment and what we do, and and we'll do a site walk, and according to the list, it says, like you said, there's supposed to be 3 pumps, but yet you go into the room and there's 2, or vice versa. It doesn't even have the pumps listed. It's
Yeah.
it's I kind of look at it as, I call those hidden things. It's the things that are out there, they're out there, or you don't know they're out there, which is even worse. And it's, how do you account for those in an FCA? If they're not in your list, is that FCA organization going to identify those? Or, is that an upcharge or whatever? I'm not sure exactly how it works, but at the end of the day, it's things get missed. And how does that impact a lot of organizations? And this is where I kind of hear this all the time. It's, what are the consequences if the information isn't accurate? So what does that mean? And a lot of that comes down to that misallocation of resources. You can't budget for something that you haven't even identified in that FCA. So how can you budget for something that doesn't exist in the FCA? Also, it's that budgeting, it's attributing a number to that. But also it fails to address some of those critical issues or potential critical issues. Let me identify that. It's a component like in your HVAC system that's not in the list, that if it goes down, it's that snowball effect. It's, this goes down, then this is going to go down. It's that snowball that can potentially happen. And but how does having inaccurate information really impact you? Well, it's that negative impact on that long-term plan. It's, I can't plan long-term for stuff that I don't even know exists. And I hear that all the time. And so what are some of the things that you really expect to learn from an FCA? And let's start with Sean on that.
Yeah, so from my point of view, just as a facilities director, as a previous tech, I touched that equipment, so I knew it a little bit better. But even 5 years into the building, I learned a lot about the age of the equipment, just kind of the lifespans on it. I don't know the age of every VFD and every pump, but now I have a list that I do, and that's extremely helpful. And that kind of helps you from a capital perspective, kind of look what's going to be into the future on replacing some of that equipment.
Sure.
One thing I also learned, during this process, you can use it as a way to identify some energy potential savings. We walked into a bunch of data rooms, and you're like, we could essentially store produce in here because it's 60 degrees. Is that essential to this computer equipment? I mean, what is our target from an IT's perspective to keep this equipment at a cool, reasonable, but also have some savings in there if we don't need to have it 60 degrees, or maybe the public bathroom spaces are that same way. So along this journey, you find some things in the road of maybe that's a good savings to really look into as you're doing it.
That's great. And Dr. Fletcher.
Yeah, I have an example of this one right here, and it kind of piggybacks on the last topic about inaccuracy in FCA. We had a plan before we did our most recent FCA to put about $6 million into modulars next to a school building. And as anybody knows, the bane of existence of any school district is modulars. We'd love to get rid of all of them. They cost more and that kind of thing. But we're about to dress them up very nice and make it very effective and suitable for the students. But about $6 million. Well, when we had our team going through with the architect doing the FCA, what we discovered, and it was timely, is that underneath these modulars, because of the way they had been put in the ground, we had purchased this from a charter school that had so we need more space. We purchase things all the time, but we needed more space. We purchased these modulars along with the parts of the building from the charter school, and they hadn't put things in such that the air could vent well. So there was a lot of oxidation on the structural pieces underneath that are actually holding the modulars up and supporting the floor. So we were able to say, hey, wait a minute, we have to reprogram this money. So we're putting up a metal building, a steel building, L-shaped steel building to take over the capacity of those 3 modulars, plus some more things that we didn't anticipate. And it kept us from wasting $6 million for something that would have been structurally unsound. So we effectively traded paying $168,000 to demolish them versus using $6 million to improve them, and we will put the money into another building.
Well, that's great. I mean, that's a great allocation of funds, and you identified that, and we're able to adjust on the fly. I love that example because I kind of look at it from that perspective. It's not just the money savings; it was the accommodation of the students, and to be
Yes.
able to shift gears like that by having accurate data. No,
And
that's a
also,
great example.
and I think one of the things too in the middle building that we're doing, I think one of the things people get out of that is we were able to do like rough end plumbing and stuff like that for the next use. So it goes into sustainability.
Great. Great. Well, what are some of the impacts of inaccurate findings from a master plan and capital improvements? And let's start there with Sean.
Yeah, I think an example I would give, maybe you took over a facility and you've got two boilers and the previous facilities manager or director just really didn't have a great water management program for those. And the boilers are just really on their way out. And then you have a group comes in, does your third party FCA, and they say, yeah, these boilers they're probably good for another 15 or 20 years. So that's what you put on your FCA. And then come to find out in 2 or 3 years, you have a major rupture or you have some major problem. And now you're going to your CFO saying, well, I know they said that we had this time frame of end of life, but actually because of the previous maintenance, these are really end of life now, and now it's become a bigger issue, and it's an emergency rather than this proactive plan approach.
You know, I unfortunately, equipment doesn't break on our schedule.
Yeah.
It's
No.
not on your clock or my clock, and unfortunately, some of that stuff breaks at 2 o'clock in the morning. But I've heard something similar from a few folks where they said, you know, the third party that's coming in doesn't know the history of the maintenance, and I think there's a lot of truth to that, and a lot of that maintenance or even that institutional knowledge was from that guy who was there when they installed the thing 30 years ago, but he's
Right.
gone now. And having accurate information or even the data from that person's head. I always hear this from people. They always point, where's that information? They point at their head or point at some guy's head. It's in his head. But
Locked
that's
away.
true.
Yeah.
It's true. It really is. And that's troublesome because then, the FCA org that comes in, they don't have that. So they're
Yeah.
going off of data what they have, and they may be pulling it up from the manufacturer information or whatever, but they don't have that story or that side of the story, and that's challenging, but that kind of puts you in an awkward or bad situation because again, you're going off of the information that you have, but now you have to go back to your leadership and explain that away. And that's the surprise factor, like we were talking about earlier, and Dr. Fletcher, what's your take on that?
I think good. It goes to the core of what we were speaking about at the beginning is that when you have a master plan, the difference is strategic versus the FCA. So what you also have to do is you have to assess your use against what your expectations for like equipment life is. And I'll give you, for example, we had to turn up our HVAC a certain percentage above what our normal use would be during the pandemic or coming out of the pandemic based on some of the standards for the state and things like that to make sure that enough air is going through to combat, exposure and those kind of things. The fact that we were required to do those things is going to have a net effect on the service life of those units. So when we came out of the pandemic and we got to a certain place, my guy said, "Hey, we're going through these things and filters and that kind of stuff. Can we turn them down?" And I looked and I saw that was no longer a mandate. We turned them down, so we probably effectively get back some service life on it. Whereas if you just kind of go, well, we turned it up and we never turned it down, and you start wondering why your equipment is starting to fail, it's because you're blowing enough air through it that is not required for the current condition. So I think when you have a master plan, you have to kind of look at when you had to increase a requirement or decrease a requirement, and that's why one of the important differences between FCA and a master plan is the fact that it has metrics to go along with it. So when I'm looking at why are my work orders going up? Why is this going up? Why is that going up? And I'll say, hey, well, we turned all the things up for COVID to get us through that piece, and now we're having more failures. And then you got to make the decision. Okay, is it okay to turn them back down so we get back to more normal operating, and then assess what the impact on the life of the equipment is. So that kind of shows the nuance between master planning and an FCA. Perfectly.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I appreciate you sharing that, because that's 100% real. And I think a lot of organizations, struggle with that. But, we were talking about inaccurate information, and this is what I hear often. And I see this all the time. It's, and Sean, you mentioned this earlier, is the example of pumps and not having accurate information in the, what's really out there in the field. And I hear this. It's 20-40% of the information is wrong. And it's not to point a finger at anybody. It's nothing to do with that. It's just facilities teams are busy, and who's responsible to maintain this, and because how often do you get called to fix X, and then you've got to go clear across to another campus, or clear, to another floor, because it's a code blue in a part of a building or whatever, and something's just going sideways, and stuff just gets missed. It's been replaced, it's been decommissioned, it's moved, or it's just new. It was, like you said earlier, Sean, it's added on a previous project and just didn't get documented, or it didn't get documented when we were digging up the hole in between the buildings and covered it up before we could document that that's even there. It's not pointing any fingers. It's just things get missed. Well, the other problem is a lot of folks are running to failure, and equipment's out in the field and it's on its last legs. It's, everybody's got equipment that looks like this. It's running, it's got Band-Aids on it and duct tape, but it's running. And you can't plan for when this is going to break. You can go off that end of life expectancy, but at the end of the day, it's going to break when it breaks. And do you choose to replace it, or do you just put another Band-Aid on it and keep going? And a lot of orgs are doing deferred maintenance, like you mentioned, Dr. Fletcher, is that deferred maintenance just keeps piling up. But why is it important to you to maximize the useful life of those assets and be proactive with that maintenance? Let's start with Dr. Fletcher on this one.
Yeah, this is a key performance parameter. It's one of those things where if you're doing your preventive maintenance on a right schedule, it's an assumption that you won't have to do as much corrective maintenance. Right. If you're getting behind on your preventive maintenance schedule, your corrective maintenance will go up. And like I said, going from the way we characterize it is that if something needs corrective maintenance, we got to do that in a standard of 7 days. If something needs preventive maintenance, that's a standard of 30 days. So time is a factor there. So if you're doing your preventive maintenance on the right schedule, you're preventing yourself from having more constricted timelines. Now, taking care of your assets means that you're going to be touching those things. So it means you're aware of them and you know what's going on, versus just having a known unknown. The known unknown is that I know I have something out there that's doing a job. I never check it, and when it fails, I'll go out there and correct it. But whenever you have to do that seven day window to be able to meet our standards, as we do it baseline off of national organizations, we also got to say, well, what spares do we have on hand? So can we do that? And is there a wait time to be able to get those spares? So if we're not properly managing our systems, and I think this is what this goes to, if we're not being proactive and managing our systems, we're going to be reactive and responding to our systems. And that becomes very chaotic because we don't know what systems are going to break. They're going to break when they're going to break on their own timelines. So then at that point, we kind of have a, I know I've talked with you before about like Scotty on the enterprise right there. We could be heroes every day. We can make the enterprise work like it's supposed to work, and we can run out there with our spares and fix it, but we don't want to be heroes. The best way to run this thing is to have it as boring as possible. So we have to do the boring preventive maintenance to make sure nothing breaks, and we might not be noticed. Might not go like, hey, you really saved the day when you come out there and fix the air conditioning and that kind of thing. But we'd rather be in a place where we know we did the right thing up front to save money, be more efficient, and keep our buildings running without any undue drama.
Yeah, well, and teams, many teams around the country, I hear this all the time. They're short-staffed. They're a lot of that what gets shoved into the deferred or just doesn't get the normal preventative maintenance is you both have touched on this, time. Time is not our friend in facilities.
No.
It's always a premium. And if I'm short staffed, that's even worse. And that's a challenge. And I hear this all the time. And Sean, what's your perspective on being proactive with maintenance and really extending the useful life of your assets?
Well, you touched on it a little bit earlier, David. I would say Murphy's Law, it's going to happen on a Saturday night at 2 a.m. It's not going to be on a Wednesday morning at 9 a.m. And the tech's going to have a cart full of parts ready to go. It's going to be at a really bad time. So you can pay a little now, or you can pay a lot later. And the biggest thing is, what does that impact on that Saturday night look like for your organization? What business is that going to affect in a hospital setting? It could be life threatening. I mean, just the process of doing that ahead of time is huge in a healthcare setting. You don't want to have a failure that's not on your time as much as you can control.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Well, and the impact, like you said, in an environment where, in the middle of a surgery, something goes down, that's life or death. But at the end of the day too, it's still that doesn't matter if you're in a hospital setting or you're in an education setting or manufacturer or whatever, you want to get the most out of your equipment that you possibly can. And we've all seen the struggles trying to get equipment today. I mean, with supply chain, oh my goodness, it can be months and months and months. And I brought this up on a previous webinar I did where I said there was a school that I was at and they had a chiller sitting on a trailer. And I asked him, I'm like, well, how long has it been on that trailer? Oh, it's been there for a year. And I'm like, a year? And he said, yeah, we ordered the new unit, but this thing's been sitting on a trailer for a year. And all I asked is a question, and I didn't mean to be the downer. I'm like, well, how much are you spending on that rental right there? And he puts his head down and he says, 10 grand a month. And I went, oh my goodness. How do you plan for that? And again, they planned on replacing that unit 2 years from now. It broke when it broke. And they couldn't get parts for it, for the one that they had that broke. And it's not on their time. That's for sure.
Right.
So the next thing I was going to ask is, again, your team's in the field. They're running around like crazy. They're bouncing from, I love showing this because they're on a roof, then they're on a lift, and then they're climbing up a ladder, in Colorado in January, and there's snow on a roof,
Right.
Or I live in Florida, they're climbing up on that roof and it's 8,000 degrees outside, and they're up there trying to fix the unit. They're bouncing around all over the place, and time is not on their side, and I always say they climb up that lift to even find a serial number. They go up on that roof to figure out, I don't even know what unit's up there, because the guy who knows is the HVAC guy, my lead HVAC guy, and he's on vacation. But having data to be able to rely on is always a big deal. And I always look at this from the old way and the new way is, I climb up on that roof and to enter or find the information. I write it down on that notepad that's in my pocket. Then I go back downstairs and I enter it in the computer, or I didn't have time to enter it in the computer. So now I'm back and forth next time it breaks, or do I pull my phone out of my pocket and enter it right then and there? It's kind of the yin and yang, it's do I do it the old way or do I do it the new way? And everybody's got a smartphone in their pocket today. And I always ask that, can they do that today? And if they can't, you got to really take a look at that, because, it's live. They're standing in front of the unit. How many times do they need to go up and down that ladder to find that information? Not every roof's a walkout roof. Some of them, it's the ladder, strapped to the side of the building, or they got to get a ladder off the truck. But the old way, again, is that up and down the ladder. The new way is, everybody on your team, even your oldest guy's got a phone in his pocket. And can they access the information to do their job by pulling their phone out of their pocket? And I'm always about the time. If I'm standing in front of the unit and I can access the stuff by scanning a QR or whatever, or do I have to write it down on a notepad, climb down the ladder, go into a room, type it into the computer? Oh, that one's not in the unit, or that unit's not in the system. Now I got to go back up there because I missed half the information to write it on that little notepad. But this is what that is looking like for more and more people today. And that's, I need to access, I don't know, drawings for the building. And I click on my iPad and click on an app and click on a building that I need to see the information for. And I cannot stress this enough. I see the stuff I need to do my job. I'm up on a roof and I can see full MEP drawings for the most recent renovation that happened. Like you were talking about, Sean, with those pumps. Can I even see the drawings that show that those pumps were even swapped out, or we went from 3 to 2? I don't know. And it's different for everybody, but also, and this is most important to me, is I kind of relate this directly back to the FCA. Can my team walk up to any unit and scan a QR code and see all the stuff for that unit? So imagine giving that capability to that vendor who's doing that FCA before the vendor even goes on site. They have access to all your equipment, accurate, but then when they get on site, they can walk up to the unit, scan that QR code, and see all the stuff. So all that historical, when was the thing installed? And if it doesn't have that, they can add it live while they're standing there. And then also all that shutoff information, gas, water, power, med gas, where are all those isolations, and having that provided to that FCA, service provider before they get there, so they're not guessing. They're not popping every ceiling tile trying to figure out where stuff is, or where's that backflow outside. And more importantly, what does that valve serve? Does it serve this building? Does it serve that building? And that's why I love to show the backflow. Is some of the backflows that I've seen in the field, they don't have that tag hanging from it. So what does that serve? Well, let me call John, the lead plumber. Well, John's on vacation, now what? And, it's just kind of that snowball effect. And how often do you really look at it from the standpoint of you did an FCA last year? How often are you revisiting that, and how are you updating that information today? And let me start with Sean. So when you do an FCA, when you did your last FCA, how often are you revisiting that and updating it as to the current conditions?
Yeah, so we're doing that on an annual basis with the third party that actually provided it. I think it's always good to have just a current state from the year ago that we actually conducted this. What's our current state look like? Maybe some equipment changed. Maybe we had a survey that requires us to add something with a little bit more priority. But always keeping up with that current state of what your facilities looks like. Back to that boiler example, maybe you had that boiler actually failed. We were thinking it was going to be a 10-year period that we were going to get through, and now it's turned into 2. Well, that kind of changes your capital list and your projections over those years. So just always keeping up with that current state. And I'm not necessarily saying that a year has to be the metric, but just making sure that your list is accurate each time you look at it.
Yeah, I mean, just the fact that you're looking at it, because I've heard some folks that have said, well, 2 years flew by and all of a sudden now we're going to plan for our next FCA. And I'm like, oh boy, because we're in facilities, we understand. I'm just thinking back. Okay, well, that was 15 projects ago. Now they were small projects, but there was still 15. What changed in that 2 years?
Yeah.
It's a lot usually. So
Right.
Dr. Fletcher, what's your take on this?
Well, I said with a school district, you have a lot more buildings. So one of the things we do is, we have a lot. And we do a big look annually. We have we call the Capital Walk, and we have people go through every building and look at everything right there. But what we do in an interim is we do when we have projects change, because we monitor monthly facility condition index. So we want to be able to monitor monthly to make sure that if a building was close to the yellow, how close to the yellow is it still? Is it still in the green, or is it going to low green? And it goes like the example I gave you earlier about the middle school and getting rid of the modulars. We're in the process of doing that right now. We've demolished one, and the building is going to go up. But just that one change that we did, not putting that $4.6 million out there, and going to a new building dropped FCI significantly. So we have to look at it on a monthly basis from that perspective. And like I said, sometimes it's not going to be a big change from month to month. And then the cycle part is when we bring in the consultant. Our plan is to bring in the consultant in probably at year 4 to make sure we have a new FCA by year 5. So in the interim, we're looking at things that are going on. We're using our metrics in our master plan, and then the next FCA gives us a snapshot to apply to what we've done. So now it's different than like when I was in the Air Force and we're looking at satellite pictures, looking at change management, just looking at one picture to the next picture. We have the why of how this got from here to here versus going, it was in this location in snapshot 1, it's in this location in snapshot 2, and speculate about how that happened. We have the ground truth to say, it was this way in snapshot 1. We did these things, we made these changes, we had this impact on FCI and deferred maintenance. So when we get our next snapshot, we'll say, well, is it accurate to what we think we're going to have based on the changes in between? And if it is accurate, then we say, yay, we did a good job of tracking across. But also gives us a chance to make our third party smarter to say, here are the things we've done in the interim. You can take a look at them and understand, so that when you do this one, we get even more refined and we figure out what things we have to pay attention to.
I love that, because I think in what you said right there is you're working with your vendors to identify things to help you and them get better. And
Right.
and that's for the benefit of the greater good. I think that's going to help their other clients as well. I'm a firm believer in facilities. We're not in competition here. We're all just trying to maintain the buildings. We're trying to maintain the buildings as best we can and learn from each other. And I love that. And I think, like you said, it's a snapshot in time, but more importantly, to your point, it's to make those adjustments as you find them too. And I think you
Right.
both really touched on that, because it's only as good as the information is today. And I love that you're both adjusting and making those modifications. So you've got that true snapshot as you go. So what are your long-term benefits for FCAs on master planning? And let's start with Dr. Fletcher on this one.
Yeah, this is one that we're very excited about, because we had a period where we had changeover. Like I said, I came into this job as an interim, and then I got the job. Great, yay for me! I got the job and everything like that. But we had some transition. Then there was also COVID in there, so we had a period where we had a lapse of being able to actually get our FCAs done. And usually the statutory, so that had been busted. We could either sit there and say, "Oh my goodness, this all happened." We can panic, but we did say, when is the right time to plant a tree? Today. So we did an FCA to get things in place, because we understand that. And then we also said, well, what is the mechanism for this FCA to get to be a master plan? We put together a long range facility planning committee, which includes myself, the CFO, because I need money. It includes at least one. The last time I think we did that, I had 2 board members, so the governance is there. My intent, not on this last meeting, but coming up into the next year, is to include some developers and builders on that too, so that we are looking at the district with a strategic eye. A lot of times school districts, especially with the cycle, try to live from year to year, from school year to school year. And for us to be effective, we have to have this long range planning committee so that we can say, we're going to look at the next 5 years of the district. So that means when I have my planner with me, she's talking to the demographer to say, how many people are moving into the district? Where might we need a new facility? That might be 5 years out. Where are our students coming from? What is the age of our buildings? What buildings will we have to close and transition into new buildings? Nobody is thinking about that right now, because they're living in the year and the moment, and that's what they do. They're teaching kids, and they're trying to make sure they get from the 5th grade to the 6th grade. But what we have to do, and what the FCA helps empower us to do, is to be more strategic and put together our long-range facility planning committee to think about, we're going to need a high school in 10 years, and the way the demographics are going, it should be here, which means that we have to have 5 years back from that, at least some work on getting a bond to build the high school that's going to be needed in 10 years. So 10 years out, we're got to think about the ramp up to the bond, to how the school's going to be, and that gives us what the cost is. So we're talking about creating facilities. So at some point, we're not just maintaining facilities. We're thinking about the next best use of facility. When we sundown a facility for one use, is it sustainable to be another use? So yeah, it's like the multiverse out there.
Certainly. Oh my gosh. Yeah. Well, and I love, kind of goes back to that circle that I showed earlier. You're still pulling in those different sets of eyes to take a look at this moving forward. I think that's so smart. And Sean, what's your take?
So I think the FCA and the master plan really go hand in hand. I know, David, you know, hospitals are always growing, and even other things out of hospitals, different types of businesses. You're always
24/7.
you're always expanding, trying to make things better. So in that planning, you know, back to that boiler example, maybe you don't replace with the same size boiler for your facility because in your master plan, you know, well, in 5 years or whatever the case, you're going to actually add another wing of the hospital. Well, there's a huge savings to upsize that now. Or maybe you pour an extra pad for a jockey boiler or, you know, a larger cooling tower or something like that. You can be more strategic in planning for the future state with whatever's in your master plan, and just kind of go along that path there, along that plan.
No, I love that. And it helps definitely with that longer term plan because again, you know that you're going to be adding that wing, you know, you don't know today, you knew that, you know, 3, 4, 5 years ago it's
Right.
coming, but to be able to plan for that, plan in advance and maybe kind of kill two birds with one stone. I like that. I definitely like that. So let's, so some of the advantages of accurate FCAs, this is kind of some of the stuff that I've gleaned from our previous conversation and other people is it allows you to make those data-driven decisions, real decisions based off real accurate information. Also identifying your facility needs, short-term and long-term, but also establishing those priorities and be able to adjust. I love what you both said as you're revisiting those results on a regular basis. It allows you to make those adjustments to those priorities and also that financial planning and budgeting long term, and it helps you develop that real strategy. I couldn't agree with you more. So let's open it up. Jennifer, let's hear some questions for the audience. I know we're running up against our time, but let's get a few questions in.
Of course. Well, thank you all for participating in this discussion. This has been great. So one question we have here from Brian is how much input/involvement should the occupants have with a facility condition assessment?
Oh, I love the
You know,
occupant
how best
angle.
to involve them. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the occupant angle. And let's start with Sean on that one. What is your take? I would almost think this would be from the doctors, from the nurses and things like that. How involved are they, or are they ever involved?
They weren't necessarily involved in our scope, but I think it's a good perspective to take whatever comments, you know, they're very outspoken. They're going to tell you, hey, this room is hot or this is not working. I mean, in the design world, we typically put a VAB for 4 offices and one person has the thermostat and they all battle against that. So I think it's a good perspective to have to listen to those opinions throughout your building, whatever level they're at. They probably have some good input.
Well, and Dr. Fletcher, I would imagine you hear from your principals and from the teachers as well.
Yeah, we do. I mean, it's a partnership. What we're trying to do in education is curate an environment that lets them achieve as much as they can. An environment that allows them to take their standardized tests and things like that in the most comfortable environment. We're trying to curate an environment that they don't notice, but they enjoy, if that makes any sense.
Sure.
They shouldn't be thinking about if it's too cold or if it's too hot. They should be thinking about tripping over cracks in the floor. They shouldn't be seeing rodents run across or anything like that. So we take maximum input from them because there's a lot of science around that in terms of, you know, educational spaces that are conducive to learning actually help students learn. And we're a big part of making sure that environment is curated in the right way. So it's kind of, so for it to be bespoke and be very tailored to the educational environment, we have to have input from the paraprofessionals, from the teachers, from the counselors, from the custodians, from the administration of a school building. So yeah, it's a very big partnership in terms of information sharing and make sure the stakeholders are properly situated for its success.
That's great.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think we have time for maybe one more question here from Sandra. How long would it take to implement an asset program like this from basically nothing?
Yeah. Well, I think I'll feel the beginning part of this is I've seen it all over the board, meaning clients that have something, but they're not able to rely on the information, or they don't trust, is lack of for a better way of putting it, they don't trust the information that they have, to people that they don't have anything, and it's not accurate. And I've seen school districts that have the asset database is garbage. I mean, and it's not their fault. I mean, it was multiple turnover of employees, multiple leadership turnovers over the years, and it just got out of hand. I think the timing really depends on the size of your sites, where they located. It can be as minimal as weeks to months. It just really depends on what you've got. I think it also just really depends on that starting point that you've got. If things are identified, some of the things are identified, at least that's a good starting point in many cases. Others, it's better to just start over, start from scratch, and that way you have that accurate information. I would assume Dr. Fletcher and Sean, you obviously you have a database. How accurate, I'm not sure, but still, what's kind of your take on that? And let's start with Dr. Fletcher.
Yeah, it's key and important to be able to know where all the assets are in your school district. We have our crews go out there and they tag different items as we come in. Things are above a certain dollar value or a certain need. We do that, and each building has a principal who's the hero of their own story. So and they change from time to time. So a person's priorities from principal A leaves and principal B comes, they get different priorities. So sometimes those assets get stuck in the storeroom and they're not being properly utilized. And that's one of the initiatives we have right now, go through storerooms to see the things that we have there. If I don't, wouldn't be surprised if I found a tube TV in or something like that, because some things have just been locked up and pressed in there. So it's very important to know the currency of your assets, make sure you're not storing trash or being a hoarder with your assets, and make sure that you understand, that's a big liability against your whole operation if you're not properly taking care of your assets, because assets going out the door, whether it be shrinkage or damage or just cannot locate, costs whatever enterprise you're in a lot of money a year.
Right. And Sean, what's your take?
Yeah, man, I would hate to have to start over, but I think if I had to, I would probably just start out with the most critical pieces of equipment and kind of put it into a phased approach. It's going to be a big thing to tackle if you got to go through an entire facility, but it's not undoable. I mean, you mentioned it, there's a lot of variables, what size is it a campus? Is it one facility? How big is your team? But I would just kind of phase it into some biteable chunks of, hey, we're going to tackle these air handlers, critical pieces of equipment first, and then we'll kind of get into the nitty gritty of pumps and exhaust fans, things like that.
Yeah. I mean, I can speak for what our team does, and essentially when we do the site walk, we open every door. We're in every room, every space. I don't care if it's a closet, but we're also popping those ceiling tiles. We're going up on the roof. We're going into the basements, the mezzanines, and I'm just a firm believer. I'd rather have more than less. So we tackle it all, and I mean, we're doing implementations at schools in less than 90 days, from the time we step foot in the door to the time we are done. It's, we've done this with multiple locations all over states, all over the country. And it really just depends on, like I said, the size of your site, how long it will take. But at the end of the day, it's not a year. I've heard from many people, my goodness, that try to do something in-house. And I don't recommend that in most cases, because usually they allocate one person to do it or two people to do it. And if you've got, 10 million square feet and you expect two people to be able to document it in a year, I hear this all the time. It will take me 10 years to do that. And I always think, okay, well, sure, it's going to take you 10 years to document that information, but how much stuff changed in that 10 years? So again, I recommend you get as much information as you can up front, and a lot of times you can't do it yourself. And our contact information's right there, so we're happy to talk.
Perfect. Well, it looks like we are out of time. David, Sean, and Dr. Fletcher, thank you so much for this discussion today. And a quick thank you to our attendees that sent in questions. If we weren't able to address your questions today, they will be shared with the ARC facilities team at a later time. Again, a special thank you to ARC for sponsoring this webinar. And a recording from today's session will be made available on our magazine's website, facilityexecutive.com, and at arcfacilities.com. Thank you, everyone, and have a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.